In this episode, we're going to reinforce everything you've learned about identity, authentication, authorization, lifecycle control, privileged access, and data loss prevention, DLP, by walking through short, realistic scenarios. The goal is not to introduce new concepts, but to strengthen your recall so you can quickly recognize what control applies in a given situation. When you hear about a user, a system, or a data movement event, you should be able to mentally label it as an authentication issue, an authorization issue, a lifecycle issue, or a DLP issue. Strong security thinking often comes down to correct classification of the problem. If you misidentify the layer where something is failing, you will apply the wrong fix. So as we go through each scenario, focus on identifying which principle is at play and why it matters. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Picture the first scenario. An employee receives a convincing email that looks like a login prompt and enters their password. The attacker captures the password but cannot log in because multi-factor authentication, MFA, is required. This scenario highlights the strength of layered authentication. The password alone is not sufficient to prove identity, so the attack fails at the authentication stage. Now imagine the same scenario without MFA, and the attacker logs in successfully. At that point, authentication has failed, but authorization and least privilege may still limit damage. If the compromised account has minimal access, the attacker's reach is constrained. This mental replay reinforces the chain. Authentication is the first barrier, and least privilege reduces the impact if that barrier is bypassed. Now consider a different scenario. A new employee joins the marketing team and is automatically granted access to shared drives, collaboration tools, and campaign platforms based on their role. That is provisioning aligned with role-based access control, RBAC. If the access package matches the job responsibilities, this is a healthy identity lifecycle event. But imagine that instead of using a defined role, the manager requests broad access just in case, and the new hire receives permissions far beyond their needs. That is a breakdown of least privilege at the provisioning stage. Nothing malicious has happened yet, but the environment has become riskier because excessive access has been granted. The recall cue here is that provisioning is where least privilege must be enforced from day one. Now think about a role change. An employee moves from finance to operations, but retains access to sensitive payroll data. Over time, they accumulate permissions from both roles. This is privilege creep, a lifecycle issue rather than an authentication failure. If that account is later compromised, the attacker benefits from both sets of permissions. The fix is not stronger passwords. It is disciplined deprovisioning and periodic access review. This scenario trains you to identify lifecycle management as an ongoing process, not a one-time setup. Whenever you hear that someone used to work in that department, your security instinct should be to ask whether their old access was removed. Shift to a privileged access scenario. An administrator uses their elevated account to browse the web and read email. If malware infects their workstation, the attacker may inherit administrative privileges. This is a failure of privileged access management, PAM. The risk could be reduced by separating standard user accounts from administrative accounts and by limiting when and how privileged access is used. The recall pattern here is that privilege should be temporary, deliberate, and tightly monitored. When elevated access becomes routine, the attack surface expands dramatically. PAM is about shrinking that exposure window and isolating high-impact permissions from everyday activity. Next, imagine a user attempting to email a spreadsheet containing sensitive customer data to an external recipient. The system detects patterns matching personal data and triggers a data loss prevention alert. The user receives a warning and is prompted to confirm or cancel the action. This is DLP operating at the moment of potential data movement. If the action is blocked, that is enforcement at work. If it is allowed but logged, that is monitoring. The key distinction is that the risk is about data leaving through a legitimate channel, not about someone breaking into the network. DLP addresses the content and context of the data transfer, not just the pathway. Your recall cue is that DLP focuses on how sensitive information is handled after access has already been granted. Now combine identity and DLP in a more nuanced scenario. A payroll specialist and a marketing intern both attempt to download a file containing employee salary data. The payroll specialist is authorized based on role, while the intern is not. Authorization prevents the intern from accessing the file at all. If the payroll specialist later tries to upload that file to a personal cloud storage account, DLP may intervene because the action violates policy. This scenario shows how IAM and DLP complement each other. IAM limits who can reach the data, and DLP limits how that data can be moved once reached. Together, they reduce both external and insider risk. The mental shortcut is that identity controls who can open the door, and DLP controls what they can carry out. Consider another scenario involving a service account used by an application to access a database. The service account has broad, permanent permissions and uses a static secret that has not been rotated in years. If that secret is exposed, the attacker gains persistent access. This is a lifecycle and PAM issue for non-human identities. Service accounts must be tracked, limited in scope, and regularly reviewed just like user accounts. They should have owners and clear purposes. The recall pattern here is that identity is not limited to people. Any account that can authenticate and access data requires lifecycle management and least privilege enforcement. Now imagine an employee logging in from an unusual geographic location using a device that does not meet security standards. The identity system triggers additional verification steps or blocks the login. This is risk-based authentication in action, reinforcing zero-trust principles. The system is not assuming that a correct password is enough. It is evaluating context signals before granting access. This scenario strengthens your understanding that authentication can be adaptive and continuous rather than static. When context changes, the level of scrutiny can change. That flexibility reduces the chance that stolen credentials alone can succeed unnoticed. Picture a final scenario that ties everything together. A remote user connects through a virtual private network, VPN, and successfully authenticates with MFA. However, their role grants access only to specific internal applications, not to administrative systems. They attempt to access a restricted server and are denied. Later, they try to copy sensitive files to a removable device and receive a DLP warning. In this scenario, authentication worked, authorization limited scope, and DLP monitored data movement. Each layer played a different role, and no single control had to be perfect. This layered approach is the essence of defense in depth. Your recall goal is to see these layers not as isolated technologies, but as coordinated safeguards. As you reinforce these ideas, practice asking yourself structured questions when you hear about an incident. Was the issue that someone proved identity too easily, suggesting weak authentication? Was the issue that someone had access they did not need, suggesting weak authorization or lifecycle control? Was the issue that sensitive data moved inappropriately, suggesting a DLP gap? Was the issue that privileged access was too broad or poorly managed? Categorizing the problem correctly leads to the correct class of solution. Security maturity grows when teams stop applying the same fix to every issue and instead address the right layer. In conclusion, fast recall of identity, access, and DLP concepts allows you to quickly map real-world events to the appropriate control domain. Authentication and MFA protect the front door of identity. Authorization and least privilege limit what authenticated users can do. Provisioning and deprovisioning maintain clean access boundaries over time. PAM reduces the risk of high-impact privileges. DLP monitors and controls how sensitive data is handled and moved. The decision rule to remember is simple. When evaluating any scenario, first identify whether the core risk is about proving identity, granting permission, maintaining lifecycle hygiene, or controlling data movement, and then focus your response on that specific layer.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.